Thanks a lot for having me here. It's a great pleasure. And I hope really to contribute to the discussion. So the idea is really try to see on. I'm from the natural physical science side of the this whole universe. So I work for it's the Earth System Science Center, which is it's a new center about 5 years old, 6 years old, put together by the National Institute for Space Research in Brazil. So it's kind of an interesting environment to be associated with. A lot of people from uh, deep physical scientists around us. And I'm more into the biology part of all this. So what Sarah asked me to do is like to think about a little bit on how the planet boundaries or the safe operating space can be seen by the South, and it's uh, it's kind of too ambitious for me to talk from the South perspective as in general, but I'll do a little bit from the Brazilian side of it and also the Latin American part of it. So I think one of the major challenge of all this is it's a scale issue. And I think Kate brought this very nicely just now. We, when we're talking about global process, how that can be reflect and can be effective at local scale. So I think, okay, so yeah, all right. This is just a frame on how a system analysis and a modeling approach can look to different aspects of the system. And we do have the planet boundary over there, basically associated to ecosystem functioning. And I just loved what Kate said about adding the donuts on this on the social part of it. The question is, how do we look to this on different scales and on different problems? So one of the effort that is being done on this modeling and system analysis that we are associated with is to do kind of a exploratory normative uh, projects where you try to engage the different levels of stakeholders and communities on thinking on a specific problem. Uh, that draws scenarios. Are they effective or not? But they at least have the engagement of different societies. So this it's a three scenarios looking to deforestation in the Amazon. And part of that, so I don't think I have those on that picture, but part of that were with local communities thinking on what they expect in terms of changing in their environmental in the so we come in that region we come from a more developed, if I could say that, maybe not in that context, but a more developed part of the country in terms of access to resource, and so how we deal with people at local scale in terms of trying the scenarios. So what I'm going to navigate a little bit here through the. So I try to get the planet boundaries uh, issues, and so I'm gonna basic navigate through the ones that I'm more comfortable about, and but which I think that are really connected to the local issues and local problems. So if we look to the first one, which is kind of a biogeochemical cycles and nitrogen and phosphorus. So this is so on the concept of the planet boundary, uh, we overpassed the limit of the safe operating system. But how we did that at the global scale and how that reflects at the local scale. So there's a huge pressure on increased food production in those in some regions of the globe, and that's particularly true for Brazil, Argentina, places in Africa. And one issue associated to that, so we see that, so that's Jean Galloway put those graphs together in terms of changing nitrogen flow. So what, and this Jan Villen came out with this graph a couple years ago in terms of how much actually we are using in terms of reactive nitrogen to produce food. So the perspective of increasing nitrogen use in those regions are huge. And those are associated a lot to the increase of food production and to the increase of the food demand. So how the global scale can affect the local scale is in that sense associated to the demand of food. So if we get to the challenges of nitrogen in Latin America, so if you get to the challenge associated to the basic to the social part of it. So this part of the world, we have about 80% of the people living in city. This is a big issue. A huge amount of land available in brackets to expansion of agriculture, and very strong social inequality. So how does permeate nitrogen? A lot associated to the structure of the food production, the structure of the agricultural production. So this goes to the how untreated sewage water affect social conditions, and so all this, in fact, that has if we look to the boundary in terms of nitrogen, that we have transpassed that, we're still a long way to think in how this is used in the region, not in terms of overuse of the nitrogen, but better use of it. Also, if we look into fresh water, and this is another absolutely huge issue, the major and the when at the global scale we are maybe in a good side of it, but at local scale we're not at all. So, and a lot of this associated to extreme amount of damming in system, and also the lack of water treatment. So, and I'm going to show very briefly something about that. And the question of damming is associated to biodiversity is huge. So the impact of biodiversity in tropical regions, in aquatic and freshwater biodiversity, is a order of magnitude higher than in terrestrial system, and a lot associated to how we deal with freshwater. So this is it's kind of not very new graph, but so that's the whole Latin America population distribution, and we the percent of house that have sewage treatment, it's very low. So in the whole system, it's about 22% of the sewage that is treated. So this it's adds a big pressure in terms of nutrient cycle. It's a big pressure in terms of nitrogen, of biodiversity in freshwater ecosystem, water availability, human health, and all that. So this is a big issue. So so that's just trying to make a parallel in terms of how the freshwater system is being seen at global scale, how the freshwater is being seen at local scale. So this is just how the system can get degraded, and it really does. So this is it's a fairly common situation in a lot of cities in that region. And this comes from the global. It's kind of a it's too black, but this comes from the Global Water System Project, one of these global programs, and that's the amount of a bigger reservoir. So we're basic have the storage capacity of about 6,000 cubic kilometer in terms of water stored. So that's other. The availability of fresh water is one thing. The fresh water associated to the other aspects is another thing in terms of understanding the system. Another critical issue relates to agriculture expansion and land use. So there's still a lot of pressure on changing the land use, a lot of pressure on, as I mentioned a little bit before talking about nitrogen, of not only food production, not only agriculture production, but also how this actually reverts in terms of internal income. So agriculture production is a huge, so I think in the US it's about 5% of the whole GDP. In Brazil it's about 30% of the country GDP. So the commodity production is very big. So we are basically the same amount of people than we're the cattle for beef. So in that basic in that area produce about 50% of sugarcane in the globe, 50% of the coffee in the globe, 40% of the global soybean. So this aspect at 3 minutes, this aspect at local scale are critical. So it poses a big pressure on the nitrogen, it poses a cycle, the phosphorus sucks, and poses a big pressure on the land use side as well. Just to make a effort that we were looking to bringing ecosystem service within this package. And what is ecosystem service is a way that people understand the benefit that nature plays to them, and associating this to the poverty alleviation or to the poverty situation in the Amazon region. And a lot of that we don't see is absence of state control, for instance. So there's a lot of place in those regions that the absence of effective policy doesn't allow actually movements to be made or changes to be made. Okay, so this is specific associated to tropical. So when you look to the biosphere integrity, one of the the elements of the planet boundaries. So if there's about, I think there's, oh, okay, so there's a huge question associated to this. We're looking a lot of deforestation. We're looking very little to forest degradation. We look very little to forest disturbance and how that actually evolved through time. Fire is a huge issue on this. So this is some data on, it did work before, but these are some data on amount of fire spots in 1 month in that region. So we can get to 42,000. So that's 2014, but still 43,000 in that period. I might have 1 minute probably. Yeah. So this is another huge issue associated to forest degradation. How we deal with that and how that's represented in terms of system resilience is very critical. I'm not going through much of this, but this is associated to the changing of the ecosystem structure. So that's definitely part of the understanding of the planet boundary, how that actually change the structure of the ecosystem to something else that's still an ecosystem, but it operates in different manner. So among all this is huge social dimension that is hidden in a way. Not going through all that, but in those 30 million people living in the region, which is not a small population, a lot of them is associated to the operating of the system, the sensitivity of the changes in the system actually prevail to understand or to have and benefit from the ecosystem service. And this we can represent at a global scale in something like this, which is fine, which I think feeds the discussion at, like from the, that's something that we worked for the IPCC, sorry, I should have coded here, but that's this prior IPCC for the regional report, which gives us an idea in a broader scale in terms of what's going on. But if we just make a small parallel to this brief information that we saw before, we see that we are a way of reflecting the effectiveness on the ground. So those are basic, some events that actually act people on a specific place, not going too much. And that's just what can happen in a big storm like this in a country like that. So people can really be affected by lack of some sort of planning and infrastructure. So that's what I wanted to briefly toss here, and I'm glad to get questions later on. Thank you very much.